Sins of a Solar Empire 2 version 1.5, also called Diplomatic Repercussions, is, as you might guess, all about diplomacy. But more than that, it also changes how economies function, how damage from warfare persists, and how diplomatic decisions are evaluated by both players and the computer opponent. Now, many of the changes that have been put through for this game, such as population-based income, more valuable orbital infrastructure, revised diplomacy tools and improved AI behaviour, are directly connected to each other. Taken together, they alter how wars are fought, how alliances are formed, and how over time things can turn into strategic decisions and meaningful impact. So in this video we're going to discuss all of that and see how it actually impacts the game. Also, this video is sponsored by Stardock, so my thanks to them for that. Do check out the links in the video description below. Now, before version 1.5, Sins of a Solar Empire 2 already supported large 4x real-time strategy gameplay, and all of this with multiple factions, all expanding across dozens or even hundreds of worlds depending on the size of the map you are playing. However, I think it's also reasonable to point out that a few of the game systems kind of operated independently, perhaps more so than the overall design of the game intended. So diplomacy did exist, but computer opponents had limited transparency in how these decisions were made, and that meant that players had to at times guess why agreements were accepted or rejected, and there wasn't always a clear answer to this. In fact, it was quite often there wasn't a clear answer. You had to kind of guess your way through this. What this resulted in was AI behaviour in both diplomacy and combat that, well, it was a bit conservative to say the least, with patterns such as turtling, predictable alliance behaviour, and sometimes less reactive decisions in terms of engagement. And this could play out sometimes with the enemy trying to play it safe. Rather than hurling forces at you to take a risk, they just play it safe and keep building people up until eventually they could perhaps try and overwhelm you. Now, economically, planets themselves should generate resources, with the population playing a role, but not acting as the central driver of income. Orbital structures, meanwhile, did exist, but their economic importance was a little bit on the lower side, on the lower end of the spectrum. So that meant not only did this actually affect how the economy operated, but if you wanted to go in and harm the enemy's economy, it meant you really had to target the planets themselves, making this quite a big job. So as a result, warfare outcomes were often a little bit on the black and white side. Either a player won a major engagement and took a planet, or the economy impact of the combat itself was relatively limited. And whilst diplomatic agreements certainly existed alongside all of this, in many games you'd find that war was perhaps the bigger incentive, the bigger driver to head towards, rather than trying to play the game diplomatically. So all of this has completely changed with the latest update. This is a free update. If you've got Sins of a Solar Empire 2, it would have updated to version 1.5, and this is all about rebalancing the game's economy and, how you tend to use diplomacy as well. So planets no longer generate resources purely on their own. Instead, all on-world resources income is now generated by population. And as such, it makes population the core economic driver of the Empire. So to support this, population structures require fewer orbital slots, and alongside this, new homeworlds often begin near or even at maximum population, although this does depend on faction and difficulty. Research rates, meanwhile, also scale with the population itself, so the higher the population, the better your research will be, and several faction-specific mechanics are included here, such as Advent's focus on resources. All of these are directly tied to population levels. And population buffs from planet items and technologies have also been substantially revised to support this new implementation. Another thing that has been changed here, and this is something I certainly did notice in my playthroughs, is that orbital mining has now been significantly increased in terms of profitability. So orbital structures are now far more important overall to the colony's economic output than what they were before, and this change has a kind of knock-on effect throughout the entire game. In terms of practical results, it means that population and orbital infrastructure are now both more valuable than they were before, but also that they're more fragile. And that means that this infrastructure can become a target of either you against your enemy or your enemy against you. It means that the economy itself can quite easily become under threat. So because of this overall economic rebalance, warfare now produces what could be considered more granular and lasting outcomes. So orbital structures act as primary economic drivers, and that means you get these hit-and-run raids that target orbital mining and population-boosting infrastructure, and these can be much more effective. So for example, if you've got some borderlands, some systems and asteroid bases, or even some planets on the frontiers of your empire, these can become quite a threat. I mean, obviously they were relatively weak beforehand because they weren't defended like your central star systems or your central planets. But the difference now is that if an enemy comes in and takes out some of your economic infrastructure, this can have a knock-on effect on your central system as well because, well, your economy weakens. So this has a number of different effects. Notably, it means that your economy can be chipped away at. Just simply taking down various different infrastructure or even planetary populations can have some, well, relatively minor to some pretty devastating effects on your economy overall. And if you do capture someone's economy, well, that really does reduce the resource potential down for a much longer period than it was before. In case you're wondering then, this does mean that wars can be moved away from purely about territorial contests and a bit more about economic disruption. And I do think this is a really nice change. Of course, you can purely focus on war if you want to, but there are a few other options available, and it does mean you need to have some better defences around some of the weaker infrastructure. So, as you can see, this is a pretty dramatic change in how the game operates on many different levels. Of course, like I say, you can still dive in and make it all-out war, but there are some other elements here. And, well, there is some intent behind these changes. It's not just about making these changes for the sake of it, not just about simply rebalancing the economy. There are other things tied into this. Most notably, it ties into the title of the game, Diplomatic Repercussions. And yes, if you think about all of this, it kind of forces you into making diplomatic agreements which involve territory and ceasefire. And all of this becomes far more valuable because wars impose long-term economic damage rather than short-term losses alone. Yeah, diplomacy wins the day here. So it's pretty clear the goal behind all of this is not just to make random changes to the game or even specific changes, but rather make the game a more unifying and cohesive whole. And it also extends into other areas of the game as well. For example, these changes also reinforce asymmetric faction design. We could take the Vasari raids here, which in particular benefit strongly from the new emphasis on orbital infrastructure damage, whilst Advent mechanics, which are tied to population and culture, also gain some greater value as well. To put it more simply, the developers have reworked the foundations of the game so that diplomacy takes on a much more substantial meaning. And yes, that in turn does have an impact on the way the game can be played. For example, AI players now evaluate diplomatic relationships using multiple tracked factors, and these include things such as trust and hate, and they can also establish rivals as well. Now, these values are not hidden, they are also visible to the player, and that allows a clearer understanding on how relationships evolve over time. It also means that AI opponents remember player actions, and that includes attacks, and they do respond accordingly to that. So, on the screen here, we can see the new diplomatic proposals screen, and we can see how this displays acceptance probabilities, and all of these update dynamically as treaties, assets, or other resources are added or removed. You can give things such as credits, resources such as metal and crystals, or even entire planets into the negotiation as well. And this allows the player to see exactly how close a deal is to being accepted. Of course, there's still a chance this may get denied, and I did experiment a little bit here. It's actually very hard to get it up to a high success rate. Putting it at 100%, for example, would require a huge volume of resources. Now, you can also spend influence here. This is another system that's been expanded, and it's been expanded into a more flexible diplomatic resource. Influence points can now be traded directly between players as a part of agreements, and they can also be used to purchase intelligence, revealing information about another empire's research progress, economy, and military strength. You'll also find that computer opponents are far more willing to form ceasefires and alliances with human players rather than primarily coordinating with other AI factions. And yes, there's some timers here that prevent immediate reoffering of an alliance after they're broken. So you can also have some control over this timer as well. And this, in essence, reduces down repetitive diplomatic behaviour. Now, elsewhere, there's been some other changes made to the game. AI behaviour has been, it's actually been quite improved and there's a few sets of changes right across the board here. In combat, for example, AI opponents now prioritize target types more effectively, and they respond better to threats such as long-range missiles or carrier units, and they now also have a much better understanding of when to retreat. The developers have said that the behaviour of this change is to prevent the back-and-forth movement between the gravity wells that we've seen before. What should happen now is that AI fleets can now retreat, they'll then regroup, wait for reinforcements, and then resume assaults a bit more coherently. In terms of the battles themselves, AI players are now quite a bit more assertive. So previously, conservative behaviour kind of led to excessive turtling, and this has been adjusted. AI opponents now engage a bit more decisively. They now go out there and make these decisions as to when to attack, and yet this also means they're far more willing to take risks, even if they might not got the resources to make an attack. In the sense of given an overwhelming attack, they might still try anyway. Not because the AI is giving the player more chance to win, but rather because the AI is trying something unexpected. Not, you understand, unexpected decision from the AI itself, not a random decision that the AI is just randomly making, but rather it's taking its chances to something a bit more tactical, something perhaps a little bit more surprise-like, to see if it can have an impact on the other players. Now, to support all these changes, which start off quite rightly be calling systemic changes, version 1.5 of the game now introduces some quick start options, and these come in a variety of different flavours. When you select the presets at the start, you now have some other options here which are basic, normal, quick and advanced. So basic mirrors the original Sins experience with minimal starting infrastructure, just a basic base. The normal is consistent with prior Sins of Solar Empire 2 default, so basically this will be at the normal starting position you would have grown to expect. Quick Start starts with multiple factories, a small fleet, research labs and a capital ship, whilst if you choose the advanced option you will begin at Tech Tier 3, so all the research here will be complete up to that tier. You'll also have partially developed colonies, stationed fleets, and a strong starting treasury to boot. In practice, what this means, if you choose basic and normal, you're essentially beginning the game from a very early starting point and going through all the early phases of the game session. And if you go all the way up to advanced, you're essentially starting at mid-game. This then gives players a real nice set of options. You can actually choose how and where you want to start and how much equipment you start off with. Phase travel can also be changed here, phase travel speed that is. It can be adjusted at game setup, and that allows players to further control the match pacing. There's also been some quality of life improvements here, which include colour blindness modes, improved tooltips and general UI readability enhancements. The modding interface has also been updated to provide faster access, clearer information, mod ratings, categories and installation and progress indicators as well. All of this alongside an upgraded modding tool set here and improved SDK support. Ultimately then, version 1.5 of the game, Diplomatic Repercussions, is a pretty big deal, and all the more so for being completely free. It's an update that is systemic in nature. It's a revision rather than a set of isolated features. It does change the way you're going to be interacting and playing the game. The economy itself now centres on population and orbital infrastructure. Warfare produces longer-lasting economic consequences. Diplomacy provides clearer information and more meaningful tools. Meanwhile, AI opponents act more decisively and react more visibly to player behaviour. Also, game pacing can be customised to reach mid and late game scenarios very, very quickly indeed, and that's actually a part I really do like. The systems overall then do reinforce each other. There's a lot of different interconnectedness to all of this. Economic fragility increases the value of diplomacy. Improved diplomacy benefits the clearer AI behaviour, and AI improvements make both war and peace more consequential and more significant in nature. So yeah, overall this is a really nice update. It's a pretty big one as well, and it's really good to see how interconnected changes can be in Sins of a Solar Empire 2. And yes, this does have an impact on how the game plays at a strategic level. If you've never played Sins of a Solar Empire 2 before, then now is a very good time to jump in, because yes, this is a fundamentally improved game. And the same is true if you haven't played the game for quite a while. This is going to be a very good time to check back in and see what you think of all these changes. So thanks for watching this video all the way through, and my thanks again to Stardock for sponsoring this video. Do check out those links in the video description. Do take care, and I'll catch you next time.